space, thank you. Okay, happy Mother's Day, or if you have complicated feelings, which I appreciated the acknowledgement about Happy Mother's Day, unless you're going to get me chocolates, then it's Happy Mother's Day. I was thinking as I was sitting there that the last time that I got to speak, got the mic in front of a congregation was when I was 21, which was a long time ago, and I had returned from doing human rights work in Guatemala, and I came to this city I had never been to called Seattle, and the Unitarians gave me the stage, and I was like, who are these people that they'll just let anyone preach? And now I've joined you all, the people who will give the mic to anyone. So thank you for trusting me with the mic this morning, and thank you for trusting me with, so I will say, so the task that I was given, which is reflecting on bodies this month, and on Mother's Day, on mothering or parenting, I'm going to talk about more generally. I want to start by just acknowledging that each of us brings a body, unless you forgot yours at home, each of us brings a body into this room. And so just take a minute to feel your body in the room before I start talking about mine. Feel your feet on the floor. You could use your hands to actually feel your body. You could touch your arms or your heart or your hands to each other. Just remember that you bring a body into this conversation, and that I'm going to talk about history and memory and lessons that my body has learned through parenting, but I also really honor yours. And I have learned through disability parenting, disability community, the power of acknowledging the strengths and the needs that everybody needs. So often in disability spaces, people will start by saying, do what your body needs, right? Whether that's going to the bathroom or lying on the floor or standing up or walking around or making noise. So certainly kids sometimes need that. Yeah. So that is all welcome here today, and I think every day. And I'll acknowledge my body, which for 40 years has moved me around this planet, and I feel really grateful for all the places that my body has taken me, including to Guatemala and abroad, and to mountains, literally and figuratively, and that it helped create 2 babies, now people in this world, and I feel really grateful to my body for that. And so I became a parent 7.5 years ago. My task, I have condensed all I've learned into 3 bullet points in 7.5 years of parenting, and particularly parenting as sort of a non-normative body and bodies, right? Disability parenting, or parenting a child and children with unique bodies. There are all sorts of ways I've thought of talking in language that doesn't fully capture the ways in which I think the title that I gave was the unlearning normal, right? And the power that I've gotten from unlearning normal. But like I said, there's so many years that I have to condense that if I make it through all 3 points and sub-points and illustrative stories, someone give me a gold star at the end. So I, like I said, most of you know, Lucas and Ida is our daughter, and all right, and I pause. I also just want to acknowledge Burke, who's here. Thanks for supporting me as I do this. It's so hard to know where to start. So I have these beautiful children, and I hope that in my parenting journey, more often than not, I'm open to learning from them and learning what they have to teach me. And I think that's true of all good parenting. But our children came to teach some pretty unique and powerful lessons. And so the first one that they have really taught me is that there's not a normal, there's not a normative, there's not a normative body from which we all deviate. And I can say that, but it is hard if you've grown up in this culture that believes that there's one kind of body that's valuable and any variation of that is not. It's hard to unlearn that. And it's taken me a while to wrap my head around it. And I thought of a story, and I got Olivia, it's okay to tell this story, because so the story is that when Lucas was born, with all the equipment that he has now, but he was 4 pounds when he was born. And, you know, so when we started taking him out in the world, he was quite small. Like the relationship of body mass to machine mass was quite skewed. And so people saw machines. And, you know, in the beginning, so did we. And we saw, you know, the necessity of keeping a baby alive. And that was really hard, and I'm not actually going to talk that much about it, but it was an extremely hard couple of years. But we got to this point pretty quickly, even in the really hard times, of loving this being, this Lucas, who's so funny and joyous, and we also got to this place pretty quickly of taking joy in overcoming obstacles. And so one obstacle was that we lived on the East Coast. He was born there. It was very hard to move here, but we moved to Seattle when he was 2.5, and I'm taking a long time to tell this story. So after we moved here, we traveled to Oregon for him to meet my extended family, and it was such a joy to introduce him to my family, and we were traveling home, and Lucas needs to rest. And at that time, he needed to lie down to rest a lot. And so we're coming back from Portland, and we find, you know, off I-5 this lovely rest stop to lay him down on the grass in, and he's playing, and we're laughing, and, you know, we take turns sitting with him in his machines and going into the bathroom. And while Burke was gone, this young man came over and just looked so forlorn, looking at us in our joy, and said, "Can I pray for your son?" And I said, no thanks. And he was pretty adamant that he needed to pray for Lucas. And I said, no, and then pretty soon his dad is behind him, and in my memory he's like clutching piously a Bible, I don't know if he was, and standing behind him saying, "Let my son pray for your son." And at this point in the story, remember Burke coming out of the restroom and just like running over because he thought I was gonna like do physical damage to these two men. I was so angry that they would assume that we needed their prayer more than anyone else in that parking lot, in that rest stop, that because of Lucas's bodily difference, he deserved pity, he deserved my assumption, a prayer for his change, right? Because this man hadn't asked his name, he hadn't spoken to him, he hadn't been able even to see, like if he had stopped and looked, he would have seen joy. There are hard days in our lives, and this was not one of them, right? So I didn't hurt them, but I didn't let them pray over Lucas, and that's part of, you know, the acknowledgement of parenting as this protective act of shielding my child ultimately from ableism in our culture that says that his body needs to be changed, right? That his body, or if it can't be changed, is less than and deserving of pity. And I thought a lot as I was putting this together around like where does that come from in our culture, this idea? And, you know, Lucas is an extreme example, but I grew up with a lot of shame around my body, and I very much internalized the notion. I mean, did anyone else think that if their body was different, they would be more popular in school, for example? And that might equal happiness? That was definitely true for me. And I think that is a related way in which our society shames and silences and asks certain bodies to be smaller and take up more space, less space. And, you know, I have in bold here, like, where do we learn this? Like, where does this come from? And I think there's a lot of answers to that, but I think one piece is that we live in a society that values bodies that can produce, right? That can go out in the world and make money. And that, I mean, I can remember when I was 13 years old, a guidance counselor, why we were talking about school budgets, I don't know, but this guidance counselor saying to me, well, you know, in Hillsborough, every child, the district spends $13,000 per child, but you don't cost that much money, he said to me. You don't cost that much. This was literally spoken to me. And I so clearly understood that he meant that special ed students, the ESL students, that poor students, that they were more expensive, and that they were taxing in a way that as, you know, a white and able-bodied English-speaking citizen, I was less expensive, right? Like, it was literally said meant to me when I was a child. And I think that we code that usually, but that is a central tenet. And if you look at, the national debate right now around whether or not we should take care of each other and the cost of taking care of people's bodies that have different needs, that is a deeply ingrained part of our culture. That. So it has been so liberating for me to be around disability culture that values and says and speaks into spaces. And I really want to name Yasmin. I don't know if that's where you come from, but every time you say, that culture, every time you say in this space, stand as you are able, stand in spirit, move your body in a way that feels authentic to you, that names a way to move, that validates Lucas's experience in the room. It is so healing for me to know that this is a space where people notice and acknowledge and love differences and different bodies in the room. So so I think as I've thought about sort of the antidote to this normative body, one is disability culture and all I've learned there, and another is this radical mystical theology that says that the divine is present within each of us equally and equally valuable. So I should probably stop there. But that's only point one. Okay. Thanks. My second lesson that Lucas has taught me really specifically is that vulnerability is hard, and it is also so incredibly powerful. And, I think it's part of it's not just capitalism that's the problem, it's one part of it, but, being afraid of being vulnerable, of needing other people, I think it's pretty human too, right? I don't want to need other people. It reveals, my own vulnerability. And so Lucas has to move in the world in a way that's incredibly vulnerable, right? Like he has to trust us to help him keep his airway open, but he also has to trust his nurses and his aides at school to not leave him parked facing a wall, to constantly move him so he can see, to move his arms so that he can hold papers up, to position things so that he can participate. That's a deep level of physical vulnerability that he moves through the world with, and it is with incredible grace. And we have this huge, amazing team that mostly gets it right, but of course I've seen the time that they left him parked facing the wall, and I was enraged, and he has this grace that is amazing. Like he appreciates the positive and still at 7, lets the hard stuff roll off him. So he has to do that, right? But I think that the rest of us can learn a lot from his and other people's forced vulnerability. I think about taking him, for me, the reflection on what it's taught me is that taking him out in the world is an act of vulnerability. Now I'm used to it, right? I have 7.5 years of thick skin. But in the beginning, again, with this different ratio of body mass to medical stroller and medical gear, we would roll around our neighborhood in Washington, D.C., and I was so afraid I didn't know how to talk to parents about this or anyone else, so sometimes people looked the other way. And sometimes people looked at him and said, "Nice shoes." Because it was and I appreciated it. It was the thing they could look at and appreciate, because he looked so different than any expected body. And over time, as I think we've become softer around the edges and more maybe approachable than then, people approach us a lot more, and there's a vulnerability in allowing that. And Lucas often gets on the playground, he gets, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with him? And, I try to make a virtual shield around him. And so I feel like part of that is my own vulnerability of being able to handle that. And I think about, for those of us who are, able-bodied, the lesson that I take, and it is the parents who hear their children ask that and stay in that awkward space and come over and try to direct their children towards interacting with us. And I can tell you my favorite response, but it really doesn't matter what the response is. There's sort of two. There's one that's shame and pulling your child away, and not knowing what to say, and so making sure you're out of earshot of Bergerai or Lucas and making up an answer for your kid. And another is staying in the awkwardness, staying in the vulnerability, and either saying, I don't know, let's go ask, or coming up with an answer that this parent feels like is good enough for even us to hear, you know. And people say things. Daniel Tiger apparently says everyone is a little bit the same and everyone's a little bit different. That's my favorite. That I've heard. I haven't actually seen Daniel Tiger, but I've heard parents say that to their kids. But I really love the redirecting of the question and saying nothing is wrong. So that's my advice. If you're with a kid who says what's wrong, it's a totally normal language for kids to use, and a redirecting of nothing's wrong. Do you want to ask why he's in a wheelchair? Do you want to ask what that machine is? It's probably my favorite answer, but there are also times that we actually don't want anyone to ask us, and there's no way for people to know that we don't have signs. So I appreciate anyone's attempt to step into that awkwardness. And I have to too. You know, we move in a world of disability where people look and move and communicate differently. And I feel like as a parent of a child with disabilities, I should be able to talk to everyone else's kid who's, you know, talks differently. And then I meet my friend's daughter who is nonverbal, and I have some awkwardness and shame around not knowing how to communicate with her, and I have to remember that it's okay and that I have to ask. So there you go. How am I doing? Do I have time for one more? So my first is, you know, this exploding of the notion of normative bodies being liberating, and my second lesson is stepping into vulnerability. And disability forces us to do that, but all of us have that invitation. And my third point that I have learned is that our bodies are inherently offer the possibility of pleasure and joy. And I think that probably most parents get this lesson, but it is so remarkable to watch our kids dance. Lucas loves music, and when he uses the word, it's really rockin'. When a song comes on, it's really rockin', he just starts like grooving with his head, and there's this one by one song, and he's doing this, and you can see the pleasure in his whole body that is free of shame, that his body moves any differently than anyone else's. It is just feeling the joy of music. And you know, Ida, who I haven't talked about, she also was born with a unique body. Her body is looser in its stringing together than most bodies, so she was a late walker, and she walks, it's pretty invisible, but she walks differently a little bit, and when she, at 18, 19 months, finally became mobile and walked, the other thing is that, like me as a child, she's big. She's at the big end of height and weight. And so, you know, it was like September last year, so she's like naked, she leads with her belly, her butt is just swaggering with this giant diaper, you know, cloth diaper, and, you know, and she was just so happy to move through the house that it was just this like thud, 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 and it's just like pure joy. I actually tried to find it, I tried to write her a letter, or like encapsulating that joy, right, that we are, that I believe is our birthright in whatever body, even the bodies that hurt, even the bodies that carry trauma, even the bodies that carry limited ability to move, that we have the right to feel joy in our bodies. And I think that as adults we often lose touch with that. So go hang out at a children's toddler music class to remember joy, or really, again, like watch the children participate here. It's so amazing. So I think that I made it through my 3 points, and I want to just I'll end with one more story of prayer over Lucas, which is that now we're part of this community, and the wonderful thing about communion here is that anyone can do it, and the wonderful thing about communion, if you don't eat, is that you get your own blessing when you come up here. And people do it differently, but Lucas comes up and he doesn't take bread. And instead, you know, John is so tall that when he leans over and speaks to Lucas, I don't hear what he says, but Lucas gets his own blessing from John, but sometimes other people I hear what they say, and the messages that Lucas gets here are, Lucas, you are blessed. Lucas, you belong here. Lucas, well, it's gonna make me cry. The last one that I heard was, Lucas, we're so blessed to have you as part of our community. And I am just so grateful to this community to hold Lucas in that way, our family in that way, but much more broadly, a vision of honoring every single body, the divine spark within every body that walks in these doors. So with that, I'll leave you and thank you.